Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Seth Joyner Show. We are on the eve of the 2022 NFL Draft. And I know you guys are like me. You're pretty much sick and tired of mock draft 1001.0s. It's about that time we get an opportunity to see not only who our beloved birds are going to draft, but also to see where a lot of these players are going to wind up going on Thursday night. I'm excited. The Eagles have got 2 first-rounders, the 15th and 18th pick overall. Be very curious to see what one Howie Roseman does with these 2 picks. Do we move up? Do we move back? Do we acquire more picks? And also, I'm really interested to see where some of these players go. Now, all of a sudden, Trayvon Walker from Georgia was the odds-on favorite to be the number 1 overall draft pick. I don't know what Aiden Hutchinson has done or what it is that Trayvon Washington has done between, the season, the combine, and their pro days. But it amazes me how pro days and the combine can really shift where guys are deemed to be being drafted and how guys fall and how guys come up and how guys get raised up. It's just really interesting to me. Listen, I got, it's going to be a joy for you guys as much as it is for me because, I got my colleague from NBC Sports Philly, Hall of Fame writer, one of the most knowledgeable guys that I know in football. And I know he's been grinding away ever since the season ended, evaluating these players. I've evaluated some, but I can tell you for certain that my evaluation process isn't anywhere close to the Diddy. Joining me today is my good friend, my colleague, Ray Didinger. We're going to break it all down. Ray, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Seth. How are you doing?
I'm awesome. We're gonna break it down, Ray, and we're gonna prognosticate, if you will, because that's all we can really do. We don't know what the Eagles are gonna do. No. We can talk about what we feel and what we think they should do, but they've got their process, and I'm pretty sure they're working through their process and trying to figure out what player may fall to them at 15, or if they need to move up. I just know that in my opinion, I just want to see if it's your opinion as well, that the draft is deep in 3 positions, in my opinion. I think they're deep at wide receiver, at offensive tackle, and at wide receiver. And those 3 positions can adversely affect where the Eagles have an opportunity to pick and where, a lot of teams, I would say, from 10 to 20, where guys will fall.
Right.
Your opinion on that?
Yeah, I agree with you, Seth. I think it's a very good draft for edge rushers. It's a very good draft for wide receivers. It's a good draft for corners.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the 3 areas of strength, which good for the Eagles because those are all areas where they could use some help. And so the players are there. And they've got 10 total picks. As you said, 2 in the first round, 1 in the second, 2 in the third, but 10 overall. So the players are there, and the Eagles have the picks to go get them. They just have to pick the right guys. I think that, no one's been whispering anything in my ear. I don't have, I haven't tapped Howie Roseman's phone. Tried, but haven't tapped it yet. To just try and get a sense of what they're thinking. But My feeling, Seth, is, everybody thinks that they traded that one pick to New Orleans, that first round pick, for a pick next year. And some people think they're done. I don't think they're done. In fact, if you were right now, my guess, and it's purely a guess, is I don't think they're sitting at 15. I think they're going to move up. I really do. Sort of along the lines of what you just said, is that you look at the top 10 in this draft, and we all know where the Eagles need help. But we also know one of the areas that's pretty strong this year is offensive tackles.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of teams. Look, everybody's drafting edge rushers, but let's face it, you got to draft guys to block those edge rushers too. Yeah. So offensive tackles are going to be premium players this year. So in that top 10, you're probably going to get at least 3, maybe 4 offensive linemen are going to get drafted.
Yeah.
And then you're probably going to get a couple quarterbacks to go, even though I don't think there's a quarterback worth a top 10 pick. Teams are always going to overdraft quarterbacks.
Right.
So every time somebody picks an offensive lineman or somebody picks a quarterback, another one of those good defensive players is dropping down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think somebody that probably a month ago was being projected as maybe a top 5 pick is suddenly going to find himself falling out of the top 10. And that's where I think the Eagles are going to move. I think Howie is going to wait to see who it is that falls out of that top 10. And now all of a sudden gets close enough that maybe he can pick his number 15 and maybe one of his 2 third-round picks and jump 3 or 4 spots to get that guy, maybe a Jermaine Johnson, maybe a Kyle Hamilton, one of those guys that all of a sudden just falls enough that the Eagles are in position to move up and get him. I would be really surprised if the Eagles were sitting there at 15 when it came time to pick on Thursday night. I have a feeling that with this abundance of picks and some of the needs that they have, and some of the really good players that I think are going to fall a little bit further than they should,
Mm-hmm.
I really expect the Eagles to be aggressive and move up.
Interesting. There's been a lot of conversation about, Howie's move with the New Orleans Saints. And this was kind of my theory. I really thought about Howie, continuing to make moves, right on up to draft day and right on up to as he sees how the top 7 or so picks begin to filter out, that now he's already planted some seeds. The conversations have already been had. Now it's just a matter of, picking up the phone and making it happen. People have still continued to chatter about Jalen Hurts, and both Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni has continued to express their undying support for Jalen Hurts, at least through this coming season. One of the things, and I'm just curious what you think, Ray, one of the things that I thought about when Howie made the move, you acquired some extra picks for this year. You acquired another 1 for next year.
Right.
And you've acquired another 2 for 2024. Right. So now you've got 2 next year and 2 2s in 2024. That gives the Eagles a lot of, draft leverage, if you will, if Jalen Hurts turns out at the end of next season not to be the guy.
Right.
I kind of looked at that like it was an insurance policy, if you will. Some of the moves that he made that would allow him to either be in position to either, trade for a veteran guy or at least have the draft capital to move up in the top 10 next year to be able to go and get that guy, whoever that guy may be.
I agree. I read it the same way. They're certainly not going to say that now. Right. I mean, they're going to voice full support for Jalen Hurts. And, I think at least for now, I think for this year, they are committed to him. But I thought that when I looked at the way this draft, the trade went down and what they acquired for next year, mm-hmm. to me, it was kind of hedging your bets. Right. It was kind of like, okay, we're going to give the kid this year. And who knows? I mean, maybe he comes out this year and continues to improve. And by the end of this year, you're comfortable with him as your guy. Good. Then you got those picks to go shopping in other areas. But if not, if at that point you decide, you know what, No, he's not. He's never going to be the guy who's going to take us and win playoff games. And we got to go get a better quarterback. Well, I think everybody pretty much agrees that from where we're sitting right now, that next year's quarterback crop looks better than this one.
Right.
So if you got the picks that you're talking about, an extra number one, an extra number two, you're going to be in a position where next year you can leverage yourself to get up and get one of those other quarterbacks and then start the process all over again. I kind of read it the same way. This is Jalen Hurts' year. And listen, I think we're all rooting for him to do well. But if it doesn't pan out and it turns out that at the end of the year you decide we got to do better, you're in a position in what should be a pretty good quarterback draft to do better.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to go back because you made a poignant point about the potential run on offensive tackles,
right?
And then the subsequent run that most certainly should follow with some of these edge rushers. It's been amazing to me to watch how it all has played out. I talked about in my monologue, all of a sudden, Aiden Hutchinson, has been pushed out of the number one spot by, Trayvon
Walker.
Trayvon Walker. You got a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau, who just, at the beginning of the season was a hands down favorite. And all of a sudden, his name is cooled off quite a bit. You got Johnson out of Florida State, whom you mentioned. And he's coming on. There's a number of guys that I feel like that the Eagles are going to be in position to be able to get. Now, we talk about their skill sets and talk about all the things that they bring. You look at a guy like Aiden Hutchinson. He is a guy who is just a pure 4-3, defensive end in my position. He's not the type of guy that you're ever going to drop. You're not going to have him doing any crazy things. But then you look at Walker and you see the versatility. You can see him in coverage. You can see him dropping in the flat. You see him do a myriad of things.
Right.
And it's just amazing to me how he shot up the board, like we talked about earlier, just because of his combine numbers and his pro day numbers.
He had phenomenal workouts.
Right.
He did. I think he was part of that great. He was part of a great defense at Georgia, and that's one of the things that the scouts and the GMs are going to have to evaluate that somehow.
Yes.
I mean that was Seth. I've been watching football a long time. That might have been the best college defense I ever saw that Georgia had. I mean, they probably have now. I may be proven wrong on this, but I have 7 of their defensive players getting drafted in the first 2 rounds.
Wow.
I don't know that I've ever seen that before, but I think that's entirely possible here. Well, good for them. That's why they won the national championship. But when you're evaluating these guys, sometimes it's hard to separate, okay, how good is he in that system versus how much are those other guys helping make him maybe look better than what he is. Walker was a very good player at Georgia, but then he went to the combines and did the individual work. And a lot of the scouts said, whoa, this guy might even be better than we thought he was. Right. I mean, people were projecting before Indianapolis, before the combine, people were talking about him being a first-round pick, but they were talking about 20 to 30, somewhere in that range. Mm-hmm. Well, he goes to Indianapolis and runs 4 or 5 and kills it in all the drills. And all of a sudden, he shoots up to the very top to where people are saying, oh, top 5. And now in the last week, just like you're saying, people are now saying he's going to be number 1. I think it's entirely possible. I really do.
Well, let's talk about that, because I get the analytics and I get the numbers at the combine and all of these things. They're an integral part of it. But to me, it really should be more about, what you see on the field,
right.
Their body of work, their resume is what they did on the field over the last 3 to 4 years on the collegiate level. Because let's be honest about it. We have now entered a phase where, these young players have learned how to game the system. Okay. The season is over. I heard one young guy on ESPN talking about it, where he basically said, for the last 3 months, I've been over at Exos. Okay. So for 3 months, ever since the bowl season has been over, ever since the national championship has been over, these guys are actually, they're out in Arizona. I know we've got, Exos out there. We've got Fisher Sports out there. We've got another one. There's a few over in California, some down in Florida. These guys have just dropped out of school, and what they're doing is they're working on, okay, when I go to the combine, how can I run a faster 40? How can I, jump a bigger broad jump? How can I, run a better 4-cone drill? How can I, up my vertical leap?
Right.
And because of the training techniques and how much time they're actually spending, at these facilities, their numbers are going up. And I see guys that are going up the draft board just based upon the numbers. And these guys have learned how to, to game the system. How legitimate is it for us to really look at these numbers and say how good of a player is going to be because of his combine numbers or his pro day numbers, opposed to, where they were before the combine and
Right.
where they were based upon what they did their senior year or, their junior year when they decided to come out.
Right. I agree with you 100%. I absolutely agree with you. It's always been my view that the answers you're looking for are on the tape.
Right.
The answers you're not trying to draft Olympians, and you're not trying to draft decathletes. You're trying to draft football players. And what really matters is, how do they play football? I remember this is going back before your time, but when my first year covering the Eagles drafted an offensive lineman named Henry Allison from Arizona State. And he was one of these guys that just killed it in the bench press. I think he might have set, for that time, the record for most reps in the 225 bar. Just killed it. They drafted him in the second round. He shows up at training camp, and he's not playing. He's not looking like a second round draft pick. Let's put it that way. And I was talking to one of the coaches at camp, and I said, what's up with Allison? And he said, look, I didn't want to draft him. He said, but he had this incredible workout. They talked about how much weight he lifted, and he said, I said I wouldn't take him, but they took him anyway. So I said, and this was him speaking. He said, what I couldn't seem to get through to the other guys, meaning the scouts, was that, we didn't bring him in here to lift Bob Lilly. We brought him in here to block Bob Lilly.
Right.
Okay. And it's two different things that, it seems so, it's to you and me, it seems so obvious, but yet year after year after year, teams keep making these kinds of mistakes, and, Al Davis, for as good a football man as he was, always fell prey to this. Some guy would run a 4.3 40, and all of a sudden Al would draft him in the first round, and the guy couldn't play. But he ran a fast 40, so Al thought he was the next Cliff Branch. So, I've always felt, to me, the combine stuff, I'm not going to say it has no value. It does, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. It's just one piece of the puzzle. I would, if I were in that position, if I were a scout, if I were a GM, I would base my entire evaluation on what I saw on tape and what I saw with my own eyes at practice and at games, watching guys play, watching how they play in the fourth quarter, watching how they play in the big games, watching how they compete when their team is behind in the fourth quarter. And when it's 3rd and 8, do they show up or don't they? That's the important stuff. Now, that's how you evaluate, and that's how you begin to stack your board. Then you go to the combine and you sort of fill in, you use the verticals, the broad jumps, the 40s and all to kind of paint the rest of the picture. How good is the athletic package? I know how good the football player is, but maybe these other drills suggest how much more ceiling there is that maybe he could improve even. But really what you're coming down to is, come Sunday, 1:00, can this guy go out and play the game? And I really do think that the more analytic driven the personnel decisions have become in the NFL, the further away we're getting from football and the more we're getting into the other stuff, which I think often leads to teams making terrible mistakes.
Well, for my money, Ray, a lot of it comes down to, what your evaluation process is. It's, you can have guys that game the system and, fool a team. But I've also seen guys, like this Hamilton kid from Notre Dame, go on and have a terrible workout, not really recover from it in his pro day workout. I've seen guys like that, Ray, who bomb the Wonderlic test, and then you get on the football field with them and they're football savants. It's crazy. And then I've seen guys who run really fast 40s or really slow 40s, but play the game at such a high speed, not only because their playing speed is greater than they would ever run in a 40, but because they understand the game so much more that they're not playing from a position of read and reacting, but they're anticipating, what can happen because they understand that they're so football intelligent. It's just amazing to me, how that works. But I've always said, and I truly, still believe it, that, the combine is a crapshoot. There are very, very few sure things in the combine. Very few, because the metric for me is, okay, how can you measure what's in here? How do you measure a guy's heart and how much he actually loves the game and how much he's willing to sacrifice for the game? And then how do you measure in here how much a guy truly knows about the game and how much he wants to get better? And until they have a metric for that they can measure at the combine or a pro day for those two variables, I don't think that, the draft is ever a sure thing. Okay. I mean, it just, to me, because everybody's got these different motivations for, why they want to play the game. Some guys want the money, some guys want to be champion, and some guys just want the notoriety. Mm-hmm. And two of those things, once they get them, they're going to shut it down and they're not going to give you everything that you want. But the invariable part of that is that, guess what? You can't fill a 53-man team with 53 guys who really want to be champions. A lot of them will say it, but what they do in order to get there is the difference maker, right?
Sure. I mean, everything that you just laid out is why you were the 208th pick in the draft, okay? Mm-hmm. And that's why Tom Brady was 199. And this goes, you can go all the way back in football, all the way back to the 60s and the Lombardi Packers. I mean, Bart Starr was number 199 when he came out of Alabama, and he only won 5 world championships. So that all the stuff that you talked about in terms of being unmeasurable, the football IQ, the competitive spirit that a guy has inside him, and just the heart that he has is unmeasurable. I mean, that's the stuff, that is really the stuff that you see on tape. And if you know how to watch it, if you know how to watch a game, if you understand the game at all, you can see that. I mean, it really jumps off the screen at you. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you a guy that I felt this way about the first time I saw him play, and it was Pat Tillman. I saw Pat Tillman play at Arizona State, and he was playing linebacker, and he was too small to be a pro linebacker. He just wasn't. But he was such a good player, and he was so smart, and he was so tough. And that Arizona State team they were good. I mean, that was the Jake Plummer team. So they went to the Rose Bowl. They were good. But Jake Plummer was the leader of the offense. Pat Tillman was the leader of the defense. And I just loved him, watching him play. And I said, and I'm in my own mind, I'm thinking, you wait and see how low he gets drafted, because they're going to measure him and they're going to say, oh, he's not a linebacker. But you put him in the right system and you make him a safety, it can play to his strengths if you use him right. But the one thing he had was the one thing nobody could define, which was he had a tremendous heart and just a love for the game that you saw every time the ball was snapped. When he won, he was the guy on the field that wanted to get to the ball. And you're not going to find that out running him around a cone. You can only find that out watching him play. And I mean, that's just one example, but there are those guys in every single draft. And I guarantee you there'll be guys like that in this draft. I'll tell you one that right now that I find very much like that is Malcolm Rodriguez, the linebacker from Oklahoma State. Now, Seth, he is probably going to be 5th round pick, maybe even a 6th round pick because he's like 5'11-ish. But I mean, I saw a couple of Oklahoma State games this year. I swear he made every single tackle.
Yeah.
I swear he made every tackle. And the guy is so smart and he is so fundamentally sound that at the very least, a guy like that, he's going to be a core special teams player day one. And I think once the coaches get to work with him, they're going to find ways to get him on the field to do more things. I mean, those guys are going to be hidden in the middle of the draft. And yet when it's all said and done, they're going to wind up playing more football than a lot of guys that are drafted way ahead of them.
Well, they're in every draft that way, and I can remember watching that Oklahoma State defense, and boy, did they have a solid defensive unit. They had a lot of good players on that defensive unit, but he is one kid that just kind of like stood out. I mean, he was just all over the field on every play. It looked like a guy who really had a clear understanding of the defense and what was being asked, of him to do on the field, and really to kind of lead, the defense in a way. To your point, you see those guys who kind of slip through the cracks every single year because, they're less than spectacular. But I always deem them, these types of guys, God gives some players the raw ability, the speed, the size, the strength, and more times than not, what happens, it's a rare opportunity. It's a rare chance. Like you see a guy like, a Deion Sanders, who has supreme athletic skills, but still works his skill sets to the point where he's unbeatable.
Right.
Okay. Most of the time you get guys like that, they get lazy and they want to live off of, their laurels, and they want to live off the fact that, I'm just a better athlete than you. And then you have the guys who know that they're not as athletically as talented, as most of the other guys that are out there. And they go out and they work their ass off every single day just to get better, knowing that, hey, I got to do it this way because I've got to make compensations for my abilities because I'm not as talented. And invariably, most of the time, Ray, from my experience, it's those guys, who have longevity, because I don't care who you are, there's going to come a point in time where your physical skills begin to erode a little bit, be it, age or be it injury, you're going to get tamped down a little bit. But those guys, I always say, give me a guy who I can develop and make him fundamentally sound, that guy will play forever, because he's going to be keying the right things. He's going to be taking the right steps. He's going to prepare, and he's going to anticipate what's going on. So even if he doesn't have the speed, he's going to be there because he's expected to play and he's anticipating the play. He's prepared and he's ready for what he's seeing. It's 3rd down, 3rd and 3, and they're on the +30, and they come out, in 12 personnel. He knows right now what they like to run out of that formation.
Right.
And if he understands that in that situation, then guess what? He's not guessing, but he's anticipating. And if he's anticipating, then that means that he's a step and a half, almost 2 ahead of the guy who's not anticipating. So it's just really interesting to watch, this whole process and how, guys are, labeled as can't miss. And then, guys like you're talking about, this Rodriguez kid, who is not going to get a lot of fanfare, but probably is going to come in and spend a half a season as a special teams player before that organization realizes that they got a diamond in the rough, that they got a tackling machine if they can use him the proper way.
Yeah, I love him. I love him. I really do. And one of the things that I've seen in my years around the game, and you just kind of alluded to it, is the desire to keep working, is the desire to get better. I mean, so often you see guys when they're in high school, they're working hard because they want to get to college. And when in college, they'll work hard and they'll put in the time and they'll work because they want to get to the NFL. But then you see they get to the NFL and it's like, okay, I made it. I'm done. And the idea of, well, wait a minute, where did the work ethic go? You worked your butt off to get here, but that doesn't mean that this is where you're going to stay. Yeah, this is what you wanted, but to keep growing as a player, you're going to have to work as hard, if not harder, than you did to get here to stay here, and then to become the player that you're capable of being. Some guys don't. Some guys just don't grasp that. When they get to the NFL, they figure, well, that's it. I'm here. I made it. I'm fine. And the idea of how hard they work to get there is kind of lost along the way. What separates, in my view, what separates the really great players, the real great pros, and the ones who have long careers is the fact that they never stop working.
Right.
I mean, two of the hardest working guys I ever saw, off season, every day at practice, were Walter Payton and Jerry Rice. I mean, they were just driven. I mean, they just had something inside them that every single day they just worked, and they kept figuring out if there was one area of their game that they could make better, they worked at it to make it better. And that's why they both played forever, and that's why they're probably the two best guys at their position. Not because necessarily they were natively the best, but because they were really good. But once they got there, they kept working to make themselves even better. But guys like that, they just don't come along all that often. More often, it's the guy who gets to the pros and just says, hey, I'm here. I'm in the NFL. I'm making money. I got everything going for me. I don't have to work as hard as I used to. And those are the guys that have short careers.
Well, sometimes it's a matter of what your goals are and what you're hungry to do. I don't know. I just feel like there are players out there that that want to be great. There are players out there, like I said, that want notoriety, and there are those that want the money. The problem is with these young guys don't realize that are playing for the money is that the real work begins once you get the contract. Because now you got to figure out, how do I maintain it? I signed a 5-year deal. I'm trying to get the entire contract. Okay. The only way you're going to get that is to continue that work ethic that got you to the point that got you the contract. The issue with that is that if that's your only goal is to get the contract, once the goal is reached, now you exhale. Now you relax. Okay. And when you're doing something, when you're trying to be the best, the thing I learned, from a lot of players that I played with and played against from my era, and then you talked about Jerry Rice and you talked about Walter Payton, is that, there's this constant evolution as a football player. You're always trying to, if you're not identifying what your weaknesses are, like when I first came to the Eagles, Ray, I played 1 year at outside linebacker. And, I think I had 11 sacks my sophomore year. But a lot of that was just, I was just playing against better talent, if you will. I didn't know how to rush the passer, but I could cover. I had good feet because I grew up playing basketball and played a lot of basketball. I was a bigger linebacker, so, I could beat tight ends up, and be good against the run. But I had to learn how to rush the passer. I identified that as my greatest weakness, is learning how to rush the passer. Well, I played right next to one of the greatest pass rushers, arguably the greatest pass rusher ever in the history of the league, in Reggie White.
Right.
And then it was not beyond my pride to go and get film and watch a Derek Brooks and a Pat Swilling and some of these top pass rushers in the league to learn how to improve myself in that area. It's like the guy who goes to the gym who's just swole up top, but he got these little skinny legs. He goes in every single day. He's doing bench press. He's got the dumbbells, and you never see the guy on the squat rack. Why? Because it's easy once you build up your upper body muscle to lift heavy weights on the bench press, but it's hard to get yourself up under the squat rack and get on the leg press and balance yourself out and make yourself, a complete player.
Right.
And guys just need to learn how to do that. Identify what your weaknesses are, and work on those, because you're always going to be good at your strengths.
Yep. Sounds like we're We could take this off and start talking about Ben Simmons, but that's another topic for
Oh,
another day.
geez. Let's leave Ben Simmons out. Now this is an interesting guy. I'm gonna throw Jordan's question, Justin Jumper's question up here, Ray. He says Jordan Davis is most likely picked. Howie loves drafting on the line, and we have substantial need with Cox and Hargrave in the last year of their contracts. Now, Jordan Davis is an interesting guy. 340 plus pounds, 6'5", 6'4", ran a 4.73 at the combine that had everybody losing their minds. I'm curious about your evaluation on him, because the one area that worries me about him is his weight. Because if you're going to draft him in the top 5, he needs to be a complete player.
Right.
And I'm not so sure that completion comes when it comes to the pass rush side of things. He seems to me more of a run stopper and a pass rush liability, which would then make him a 2-down player.
Right.
You get the 3rd down, you're going to take him out of the game because, he can't rush the passer. Now, if you go and you draft him, in my opinion, the first thing you do is, okay, we're going to bring you down from 240 to 220 to 315, 320 to 315, I should say. And then we're going to work on your feet and teach you how to rush the passer. Because I think that when you look at his body and you look at his build, if you can get him down 20 pounds and work on his feet, then you would have a complete player, But the way he's constructed and the way he's built right now, he's just a run stuffer.
Right. It's funny. It's funny you should bring him up. I was at the Maxwell Club dinner a couple weeks ago, and Jordan Davis won the College Defensive Player of the Year award, the Chuck Bednarik Award. So he was at the dinner. So I actually got to meet him after having watched him all year. Boy, he's big. I mean, even in a room full of big men, he was big. And he was telling me that he played at 355 this year. He got down to 340 for the combine, which was where he ran the 4.7. He knocked off 20 to 25 just for the combine. Now, can he knock it down another 20, or is he more likely to go back up to 355? I don't know. But when you watch him on film, I mean, he's a guaranteed run stuffer. I mean, there's no question. I mean, you can't move him. And he's also because of the way he's built, he can fit in a lot of different systems. I mean, if you're playing 3-man line, he could certainly be your nose. Right. He could certainly be your zero technique for sure. He could also play probably some 3 technique too. He could probably play in the gap some. So you could do a lot of different things with him. But he's a very and I think you're kind of alluding to this, Seth. He's a very polarizing player. I mean, there's some people you talk to that like him a lot. And there are other people that express your same concerns that, we're going to spend the 11th or 12th pick in the draft for a guy who's coming off the field on 3rd down. It's hard to justify.
Right.
So it really depends on how you view him. But I think for him to really come in and be the impact player that he's capable of being, I think conditioning is going to be really significant. Because there were times, as good as he was at Georgia, and he was a part of that great defense, there were times that he looked gassed, and he's just going to have to rectify that. But if you watch him, he can chase plays down going away from him. I mean, he gets to plays outside the hashes that you wouldn't expect a big man to get in pursuit. He can do that, but to be a really game-changing kind of NFL player, he's got to be able to get up the field and get after the quarterback. I mean, a guy like him should be a big-time pocket collapser, and that's what you're going to need him to do. I know his name has been linked to the Eagles a lot. I have a feeling, and again, this is just a feeling, that Baltimore is picking right ahead of the Eagles. Baltimore is at 14. And to me, he looks like a Raven, you know. I mean, the Ravens always like those kinds of guys. I mean,
Right.
whether it's Saragusa or Nada, or they always seem to have that kind of guy in the middle of their defensive line. And, you know, if that's who Howie likes, and I don't know if he does or doesn't, but I think you would have to probably need to get ahead of the Ravens, because I have a feeling if the Ravens have a shot at him, he would probably be their pick.
Well, he definitely fits the mold of, what the Ravens like to do. They like to, eat up offensive linemen and let their linebackers run free to the ball and knock snot out of people, and they haven't been able to really play defense that way, since Ray and Zaragoza and, all of those big guys that they had down in the front, have left the team. I just think that, when you draft a guy that high up, and we're talking top 10, top 12, that you want the whole package. And I think he has the capability of being the total package. He just needs to be in the right system that will require him to lose the weight, to work on everything that he needs to do to realize his full talent. I just, I get the fact that, Ray, you're not moving him, okay? Even if you double team him, you're not moving him. You're not moving in the way that our tackles got pushed, out of gaps last year.
Right.
The other thing is, he understands that on plays away, if I just run down the line of scrimmage, that's a good enough angle. The guy's got to come to me. Especially, if he's playing interior, if he's a 1 or 2, even if they run away from him, if he just goes down the line of scrimmage, the guy's got to come to him, but he has the hustle and the wherewithal to get it done. I just want to see him be, that pass rushing threat, that type of defensive tackle that's a beast in both areas, that not only can he control the line of scrimmage from the perspective of the run, but I think we're evolving into, a defensive NFL where if you don't have pressure up the middle, then you're not going to get pressure, because the guys outside are just going to get run by and the other guys get stalemated at the line of scrimmage. One of the reasons why Aaron Donald is so prolific is because he can get in and disrupt and make the quarterback move one way or the other. And if he doesn't move, then, he's sacked. And he can be that guy. I think he has all of that within him. Can you develop the other part of it? And that's the pass rushing piece.
Yeah.
That's the biggest question. So let's talk about the linebackers, and then I got a major question for you. So, I was very high on Nakobe Dean watching the national championship game.
Right.
I didn't really know much about Devin Lloyd until the season was over and I started to look at some of the linebackers. And once I started watching this kid Devin Lloyd, Ray, and I think that Nakobe Dean is a tremendous leader, and I think the Eagles, that's one of the places for the Eagles that they lack. I don't think they've had the type of leadership on the defensive side of the ball since Chris Long decided to call it a day. And since they, decided not to bring Malcolm Jenkins back, I think they lack it. I think BG is a great leader, but when you're not on the field and you're injured, your voice carries a smaller amount of weight than it does when you're out there and you're actually, making things happen, and you can speak to a guy and that guy's going to follow because you're leading by example.
Right.
Fletcher's never been that guy, to have a voice, to step up, even though he probably could. But they need more leaders on the defensive side of the football. But when I watch this kid, Devin Lloyd, play, I mean, he runs like the wind, right? You're not going to. He can be an asset in the nickel situation because he can cover backside of the backfield and he can cover tight ends. I'm not so sure that Nakobe Dean isn't a passing liability. He's a good zone player, but I'm not so sure that when you start putting him on backs and tight ends that he'd be able to to stand up. But when I watch this Lloyd kid, I'm telling you, Ray, he looks to me like the complete package, you know. And if ever there was a kid in the last 5 years that I looked at that I felt like would be a great fit for the Eagles because he's a born leader too, it's this kid. Would love to see somehow, some way, the combination, you know, of Lloyd and Davion Taylor getting healthy and being able to have that kind of speed and that kind of physicality at the linebacker position, especially when you're in a position now where you're basically a 4-2 all the time anyway.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. When you talk about the linebacker group, they are the two top guys. I don't think there's any much question. You know, it's Lloyd and it's Dean. Quay Walker, another Georgia guy, has certainly gotten mentioned and also has worked his way into, I think, probably being a second-round pick. But first-round linebackers, it really might just be those two.
Right.
And I think it's a matter of individual taste because I've talked to a lot of people, and some, hands down, it's Dean. You know, it's not even a question. With Lloyd, we're getting back to Indianapolis again. We're getting back to the combine. People came away from Indianapolis disappointed in the way he tested. He didn't run as fast as they thought he would. He didn't test as well as they had hoped. And so people were coming away from Indianapolis saying, I don't know. You know, I thought I'm a little disappointed. Again, this gets back to but you saw him play.
Yeah.
You saw him play. But, you know, it is a very funny mindset out there. As often as we talk about this with general managers and scouts, you know, how many times they repeat making the same mistake. You know, every year you think that they'll learn their lesson, that they, you know, drafted a guy based on a great combine. He turns out to be not a player. And the guy they passed on, who was great on tape but had a bad workout, they passed on, and the guy turns out to be a Pro Bowler. You know, this gets repeated year after year, and they keep making the same mistakes. And I think Lloyd is sort of in that category. Now, he has sort of rebounded a little bit in the last month. He's had some good individual workouts, and now his stock is coming back up again a little bit. The one thing about at the linebacker position, I honestly think that instinct is a big part of football. But I think at linebacker, I think it's more important at the linebacker position than maybe any other position. I think the linebacker position is a 90% instinct position. It really is. Well, heck, that's one of the things that made you really good. I mean, I thought you studied like crazy. You studied as much as the coaches did, if not more. But I thought one of the things that really set you apart was I thought you were a tremendously instinctive player. And the really great linebackers are. And that's one thing. It's harder for me to evaluate Lloyd because I didn't see that much of Utah. And what I did, the caliber of competition was just kind of so-so, to be honest. But Dean, I saw a ton of Dean and always playing in big games against really good players. And we know he's undersized. I mean, Lloyd certainly looks the part more than Dean does. But Dean has just incredible instinct where, I mean, he's always moving to the ball. And part of the reason why he's so effective is he beats blockers to the point of attack. I mean, he's getting to the ball before the blocker can get to him, which allows him to play the way he plays at 5'11", which is really what he is. You know, to me, he looks like, and I know Belichick is going into this draft and has said he wants to draft a linebacker. He feels like his defense hasn't had that kind of guy for a couple of years. I think if Belichick gets a chance at Dean, he'll take him in a second because I think he's really his kind of player. I can kind of see what you're saying with Lloyd. But now we get back to the history of the Eagles never drafting linebackers in the first round. I mean, it hasn't happened since Jerry Robinson in '79. Could it possibly happen this year? I don't know. I mean, to me, he's a good enough player that would warrant that. And I agree with you. When you look at his size and you look at how fluid he is and the speed that he has, I mean, if you're a defensive coordinator, you can do so many things with him that I think I'd be willing to bet you that he will go higher than Dean does. I think the first linebacker off the board, I think, will be Lloyd. I think the combine thing, I think, is behind him now, and people are now starting to go back and looking at his strengths and what he does well, as opposed to running a slow 40, and have finally decided that, you know what, yeah, this guy's a worthy first round pick. So, I think he would be on the board in the teens, like around 15, if the Eagles are still sitting there. I mean, that's probably right around where he would go, I would think.
Well, it's just the versatility. When you think about these players and what they bring to the table, and one other guy, I want to bring up, so the Eagles signed Hassan Reddick.
Right.
Great move. Kid double-digit sacks the last 2 years. The thing that worries me about the signing, I talked about it on previous shows, is how is Jonathan Gannon going to deploy him? How's he going to use him? The Arizona Cardinals had him off the ball, his first 2 years, kind of figured out that wasn't the best way to use him. Carolina, picks him up and he, goes back-to-back double-digit sacks. But the question is, how's Jonathan Gannon going to deploy him? Because You can't line him up as a 4-3, and all day long at 6'1", 235, 250 pounds and think that he's going to be able to survive a whole season and be healthy. But yet, how do you deploy him in a way, Ray, where you're not in a 5-man front all the time? A la, in the position that they put Jannard Avery in. And even though he's an upgrade from that standpoint because he can drop and he can go into coverage and all those things, but you're not spending what you're spending on him to be dropping him. You're spending what you're spending on him to rush him. And when you go 5-man line, that puts you at a great, disadvantage on the back end because you're rushing 5 and you only got 6 in coverage. So, give me your thoughts, as we wind down here on Hassan Reddick and how he potentially can be used and what they're going to do with him.
There really isn't much I could add. I mean, you must have been listening to me on the radio, because that's everything you said is exactly how I feel. I mean, I really like Reddick. I saw him play at Temple. I was not surprised. Some people were surprised he was a first round pick. I wasn't. I mean, if you watched him play, the guy's a natural pass rusher,
right.
But he's not one of these guys like Micah Parsons that can just put his hand on the ground and just bull rush people. He can do that once in a while, but to maximize him as a player, a lot of it has to be on the defensive coordinator and how he uses him. He's a very scheme specific kind of player. And if you put him in a scheme that doesn't fit him, I don't know. I don't know that he's going to have a whole hell of a lot of impact. If you use him right, he can. Now, I like the fact that he was successful really in 2 different systems. I mean, he had his moments. He certainly was successful in Arizona. He was even more successful in Carolina on a not particularly good defense. But I guess this kind of speaks to my concerns about Jonathan Gannon more than it does about Hassan Reddick. Because I know I've seen Hassan Reddick be a double-digit sack guy in the NFL. I know he's got the ability to do that. But he has to be in the right system to allow him to play to that level. And I don't know. I still have real questions about Jonathan Gannon. It's one of the things about signing guys as free agents. You can sign a guy and spend a lot of money to bring a guy in who has a heck of a good track record. But if your coaching staff doesn't know how to use him and get the best out of him, people are going to wind up saying, well, that was a bad signing. Well, no, it wasn't a bad signing. It was just that you didn't think it through sufficiently. Reddick is coming here with the ability to really help this team in an area where it needs help. I mean, they desperately need to improve their pass rush. And this guy can do it. But he's going to need to be in the right system to do it. And that falls on Jonathan Gannon. Seth, I am with you 100% on that one, because I've raised all the same concerns myself.
Well, I always say, one of the biggest mistakes that organizations make in free agency is looking at a guy in someone else's system and projecting what he looked like in theirs without really having a clear understanding of what that system is and how the players are deployed in that system. because if he doesn't fit, then it falls under the heading of another free agency signing that went sideways and wasted money. Well, no, what you didn't do is you didn't go and sit down with your defensive coordinator. You didn't go and sit down with your linebackers coach and have a conversation. Okay, let's look at this guy on film and let's figure out, can we do with him what they're doing with him? Can we utilize his skill set, or are we going to bring him here and ask him to do something totally different? Like, okay, he's a man corner. You sign him to be a zone corner, and he's completely lost because that's not the world that he lives in. And then you're disappointed in the signing. Well, you made the mistake of not understanding how to deploy him the proper way. All right. So I don't know. And lastly, Ray, I want to touch on, there's a lot of questions, a lot of conversation going on the board here. People are talking about wide receivers and the Eagles drafting wide receivers. Is it remotely possible? And I'm going to give you the last couple of minutes to just dive in and do what you want to do with it. Is it remotely possible that the Eagles could be in the market for another wide receiver in the first round for the third year in a row? Do you realize that the Eagles in the last 14 to 15 years have drafted 15 to 16 different wide receivers across the board, and how much draft capital that speaks to that they've put into that position? Can they possibly do it again 3 successive years in a row, even when you're trying to give your young quarterback all the help that you can give him at that position? Can they do it again, Ray?
I think so.
Wow.
I think so. I mean, I'm not offering that by way of prediction. Okay. Right. I'm not saying they're going to, but could they? Sure. For two very obvious reasons. Number one is they still have a need for that other guy. They need that other receiver. And number two, as we said at the very top of the show, there are a lot of really good receivers in this draft. A lot of them. So, I mean, if they do what scouts always claim that they try to do, which is stay true to their board and go by value relative to draft position, it could very well be that they could be coming up on the draft and the highest rated guy on their board will be a wide receiver. Now, people will roll their eyes and say, how could you do that again? But if it's the right guy, I can't argue against it. I mean, I would put a higher priority in this draft on defense because I think the defense really needs that much help. They certainly need to get younger. They need to get faster desperately. But they also need that other wide receiver. If you're going to develop your young quarterback, you got to give him some weapons. And Seth, there really are some good receivers in this draft. So I don't rule it out that they could pick another wide receiver in the first round this year. And, if it's Garrett Wilson, if it's either of the two Ohio State guys, Olave, I'm okay with that because I think there are guys that can come into the NFL and play right away. I really do. I don't know if it's – I've seen a couple of and you talked about mock drafts, and I've seen a million of them. A lot of them have the Eagles taking Jamison Williams, the kid from Alabama who's coming off the torn ACL. I would be very leery about that, even though he was a dynamic player before he was hurt. I would just be very leery about taking a guy that's already got a torn ACL. But I've seen a lot of people suggest that that's where the Eagles might go. But the two Ohio State kids I like very much.
Before we go, I was listening to Sirius a couple of weeks back and heard the guys chatting with Christian Watson from North Dakota State.
Yes.
Very impressive young man.
Yes.
And then they started talking about his numbers and the numbers that he put up, not only on the field and how versatile he was, jet sweeps, put him at running back a little bit, a lot of different things that, that they did with him. But also, 6'5", 208 pounds, 210 pounds, ran a 4.3, 640,
right.
Jumped over 10 feet in the broad jump. And, likely a guy who may fall to the end of the first, depending on how everything pans out.
Right.
Maybe into the second.
Right.
I would say I'd be more in favor of that, Ray, because I'm cognizant of the draft value that has been spent over the years. And when you're that out of balance, I think it screws up everything. No matter what your needs are, you have to balance out your draft where you're making sure that you're, targeting every position. And when you've drafted what is it now? You go back to Nelson Aguilar, J. Matt, Mac Hollins, JJ
Yeah.
Arthur-Whiteside,
Yeah.
Jalen Rager,
Yeah.
and then Devontae Smith. That's 6 wide receivers. What, in the last 4 years or 5 years that the Eagles have drafted?
Right.
And a lot of them first, second rounders. That's a
Yeah.
lot of draft capital to spend on one position.
Yeah, and not that much further back, Josh Huff too. I mean, that was I mean that same thing. Funny you should pick Christian Watson. I have him as one of my. I've picked 5 sleepers in this draft, my favorites, and he was one of them. I saw him last year when I was watching tape on Trey Lance when Trey Lance was coming into the draft.
Mm-hmm.
So I was watching all the Trey Lance tape to just try and get a line on him, and I was thinking, who's this guy? Who's this guy catching all the passes?
Yeah.
That was how I found Christian Watson. And then I watched him this year, and I was really impressed. You're right. I mean, he's 6'4", he's 210, can really run, returns kicks even. I don't think he would do that in the NFL, but, I mean, he's got that kind of ability. The guy who he reminds me of, he really reminds me of Jordy Nelson. I mean, he looks like that kind of player. What I was really kind of curious about was having seen him play at North Dakota State against that level of competition. He way outclassed the defensive backs there, way outclassed them. So I said, okay, let's see what happens when he goes to Mobile and plays in the Senior Bowl when he's up against the best defensive backs. Can he still get separation? Can he still make plays? And he did. I mean, he went down to Mobile and was the best receiver down there against Division I players. So that's when I was sold on him. And that's when people started talking about him maybe getting into the first round. I still think that's a little high. I still think he's more likely a second-round pick. But if the Eagles haven't looked at a wide receiver in the first round, and I kind of think they won't, if he's still on the board in the second round, I think he's a guy that I would really like to see them get because they need that other guy opposite Smith. It would help if he was a big guy who could really stretch the field, which Christian Watson could do. It's funny you should point him out because he's one of my favorite players going into this draft. I think he's a second round pick, and I think he would look really good here in Philadelphia.
And he's a bigger receiver that you can utilize, in the bubble screen and the blocking game. You actually need that. I mean, listen, he's on my radar, and I have it on good knowledge that Aaron Moorhead was up in North Dakota State working him out. So you don't make those trips unless you know for sure that that's a guy that you're really interested in. And it's kind of hard to sneak in and sneak out without anybody finding out that you were there. I know he was there. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. Well, Ray, listen, as usual, we could do this all night long, man. I only got to, a little bit of who I really wanted to talk about and what I really wanted to talk about. But, that's our hour. We're about 4 minutes over. And, my friend, it's always a pleasure to be with you. It's always a pleasure to talk football with you. And like I tell my guests all the time, our time is our most valuable commodity. Thank you and I thank Maria because it's late here, in Philadelphia. So I thank her for allowing me to have you for an hour to talk some birds and some football, man.
She wouldn't do it for everybody, Seth, but she'll do it for you.
Well, tell her I said thank you, man. Hey, listen, guys, that's the show for tonight. Make sure, you guys take care of each other and be good to each other. But most importantly, make sure you love each other. Excited. We'll be back next week. I probably should have Ray on next week after the Eagles did all, after the draft. But, I just felt like, this was the right time to bring you on and chat about, what potentially the Eagles could do.
Anytime, Seth. You know that.
Well, I appreciate it, my friend. Guys, that's the show for tonight. Make sure you guys tune in next week. We'll be breaking down who the Eagles got, where everybody went next week on the Seth Joyner Show. Thanks for watching. I will see you guys next week. Same place, same time.